You are walking across the open savanna. The midday sun beats down on your bare shoulders. The heat rises in shimmering waves from the dry earth. You take a step forward. And as you do, a dark, silent shape stretches out before you on the dust. It mimics your every move. You raise an arm. The shape raises an arm. You stop. It stops. You turn your head. It turns with you, but it has no face. It has no eyes. It makes absolutely no sound. For 99% of human history, this wasn't a hypothetical curiosity. This was a profound and terrifying encounter with the unknown. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors didn't have mirrors. They didn't have compounds of perfectly reflective glass. They didn't have windows or screens or front-facing cameras. The only way an ancient human could ever see a projection of themselves was through the dark, distorted silhouette cast upon the earth by the sun. But what actually happened when an early human first realized that this dark shape was them? It was not a simple, instantaneous realization. It required a massive, unprecedented leap in brain power. To understand a shadow, you have to first understand yourself. You have to possess a deeply complex psychological trait. You have to possess what modern scientists call theory of mind. You have to know that you are a distinct individual, separate from the environment, and that you take up physical space in the world. Think about how an animal reacts to a mirror. A dog barks at its own reflection. A bird pecks at the glass. They do not understand that the image is them. For millions of years, our earliest hominid ancestors likely treated shadows the same way. They ignored them, or they feared them as strange, dark creatures that followed them across the plains. When did this cognitive spark finally happen? When did a human look at the ground and realize, that is me? Evolutionary anthropologist Stephen Mithen points to a groundbreaking concept in human evolution. He calls it cognitive fluidity. For a long time, the early human mind was strictly compartmentalized. Your ancestors had a specialized area of the brain for surviving in nature. They had a separate area for making stone tools. They had another separate area for navigating complex social relationships within the tribe. These different parts of the brain operated like separate rooms with the doors closed. But eventually, roughly 100,000 years ago, those walls broke down. The doors opened. The brain started connecting completely different concepts. A shadow was no longer processed just by the natural history part of the brain as a dark patch on the ground. It was suddenly processed by the social and self-aware parts of the brain. The shadow became an extension of the body. It was a visual echo of your existence. Imagine the absolute, staggering shock of that first connection. You are a hunter-gatherer. You are tracking a herd of wild horses. You look down at the dirt. You see the elongated shadow of your own arm holding a wooden spear. You move the spear. The shadow spear moves perfectly in sync. You step side to side. The shadow steps with you. You suddenly realize that your actions dictate the shadow's shape. You are in control. It is the absolute birth of self-awareness. You are looking at proof that you exist. But this breathtaking realization came with a terrifying consequence. If the shadow was you, what happened when it disappeared? The world of an ancient human was entirely governed by the sun. When the sun was low on the horizon at dawn, your shadow was a towering giant. It stretched for miles across the grass, making you look like a god. But as the sun climbed higher into the sky, the shadow began to shrink. It grew smaller and smaller. By high noon, with the sun directly overhead, your shadow vanished completely beneath your feet. If your shadow was a literal extension of your physical self, its sudden disappearance felt like a loss of your own existence. It was deeply, fundamentally unsettling. And when a dark storm cloud rolled overhead, blotting out the sun, the shadow died instantly. When night fell, the shadow was swallowed by the darkness. So let's reconstruct a typical evening near the end of the Pleistocene epoch. The sun has set. The temperature is dropping rapidly. You are sitting by a roaring campfire inside the mouth of a deep limestone cave. The fire crackles and pops. The flames leap and fall in unpredictable rhythms. The light is erratic. And on the curved, jagged stone walls all around you, giant, distorted versions of your tribe are dancing. These shadows stretch all the way up to the cave ceiling. They bend around sharp corners. They warp over stalactites. They flicker out of existence when the fire dips, and they instantly return as towering monsters when a dry branch catches flame. To your ancient brain, this wasn't just a trick of the light. This was literal magic. The renowned cognitive archaeologist David Lewis Williams spent years studying the ancient rock art of the Sand People in southern Africa. He sought to understand how early humans perceived the deep, dark spaces of caves. He theorized that cave walls were not just walls. They were seen as the membranes between the physical world and the spiritual realm. The shadows cast on those walls by flickering fires were not just outlines. They were spirits. They were the souls of the ancestors stepping out of the solid rock to sit by the fire with you. When your ancestors ventured deep into places like Chauvet Cave in France, they carried flickering torches. The light cast wild, moving shadows across the natural curves of the stone. When they painted a massive mammoth or a leaping lion on that cave wall, they weren't just decorating their home. They were using the shadows to animate the paint. The flickering torchlight made the painted animals look like they were breathing, running, and charging. They were bringing the cold stone to life. But outside the safety of the cave, the shadow took on an even darker, heavier meaning. In 1871, the pioneering anthropologist Edward Tyler published a foundational work on human belief systems. He introduced a concept called animism. Tyler studied early human cultures, isolated tribes, and ancient traditions from all across the globe. He was looking for the very first religion, the very first belief in the supernatural. And he found a universal pattern. Across wildly different cultures that had never interacted with each other, the shadow was almost always interpreted as the exact same thing. It was the human soul. Why would early humans across the entire planet all arrive at the exact same conclusion? Because of the deeply traumatic reality of death. In the ancient world, death was a constant, everyday presence. When a member of your tribe died, their physical body remained. It was still there. It was heavy, tangible, and real. You could touch their skin. You could see their face. But something vital was missing. The animating spark was gone. The life force had vanished. Your ancestors desperately tried to understand this. What else behaved like that? What else was attached to the human body, but had no physical weight? A shadow. The shadow perfectly mirrored the concept of a soul. It was tied to the physical body. It moved with the life and energy of the person. But you couldn't grab it. You couldn't weigh it. Therefore, to the ancient mind, the shadow must be the soul made visible. This profound belief shaped human behavior for tens of thousands of years. It became the foundation of countless ancient taboos. In many early cultures, stepping on another person's shadow was considered a highly violent offense. It was a literal attack on their spirit. If you stepped on someone's shadow, you were crushing their life force. Some tribes completely refused to walk out into the open at high noon. They were absolutely terrified that because their shadow had shrunk to nothing beneath their feet, their soul had been temporarily lost. They believed that a person without a shadow was a person marked for death. In folklore, creatures without shadows are always monsters. Vampires. Demons. The undead. Because a creature without a shadow is a creature without a soul. The shadow became the very first ghost. It was the original paranormal entity. Long before humans believed in angels, demons, or complex pantheons of gods, they believed in the dark, silent double that followed them everywhere they went. This belief was so powerful that it survived the agricultural revolution. It survived the rise of massive empires. It survived the industrial age. We built towering cities. We constructed modern houses with thick walls. We invented brilliant electric lights to banish the darkness. But agriculture and modern civilization changed our physical surroundings. They didn't change our ancient brains. We are still carrying the exact same psychological hardware as the hunter-gatherers who stared at the cave walls. The primal fear remained deeply embedded in our DNA. The famous developmental psychologist Jean Piaget spent decades studying how modern children learn and understand the world. He discovered something fascinating about shadows. Up until a certain age, Almost all young children believe that shadows are alive. They believe shadows are independent objects, separate from the things casting them. They will try to run away from their own shadow. They will cry when a larger shadow covers theirs. Piaget realized that children are independently recreating the exact same cognitive journey as our ancient ancestors. Every single child goes through a phase of animism. They believe the dark shape has its own intentions. They believe it is watching them. Think about why children are universally afraid of the dark. It is one of the most common, deeply rooted fears in the human experience. It isn't just the absence of light that scares a child. It is what the darkness allows the shadows to become. In the dark, a pile of clothes on a chair transforms into a crouching predator. A coat hanging on a door becomes a tall, silent figure waiting in the corner of the room. The fear is not of nothingness. The fear is of an entity that moves without making a sound. A shape that perfectly resembles a human, but has no face, no eyes, and no voice. This isn't a modern anxiety. This is a survival mechanism. This is your brain scanning the perimeter of the campfire, looking for the shape of a wolf just beyond the firelight. We tell ourselves that we have outgrown this. We tell ourselves that we are rational, scientific beings who understand that a shadow is simply the obstruction of photons. We know the physics. We know the geometry of light. But logic cannot always override instinct. The next time you are walking home alone late at night, the next time you turn down a dimly lit street where the only light comes from a single, flickering overhead bulb, you hear your own footsteps echoing on the concrete. You look to your side. You see your silhouette stretch out wide and dark against a brick wall. It towers over you. It moves silently alongside you. Pay attention to what happens in your body. Pay attention to that tiny, irrational shiver at the base of your spine. Notice how your heart rate slightly elevates. Notice how your eyes dart toward the dark shape, just to make absolutely sure it is mimicking your movements. Just to make sure it hasn't stopped while you kept walking. That shiver isn't a modern phenomenon. That is a 300,000-year-old instinct waking up inside your nervous system. You see the dark shape. You logically know it is just an absence of light caused by a street lamp. But your body remembers a time before street lamps. Your body remembers when the dark shape was a spirit. Your body remembers when it was alive.